welcome to my home. I see that I have visitors. Welcome, come on in. It's almost tea time. Oh, Helen, how are you?
Good to see you,
Good to
darling.
see you, dear.
Good to see you. How you doing?
Your hat gets in the way
I
there.
know.
Now, who am I? In my dressing gown, my straight pipe here, you might think of me as just another British gentleman enjoying an after tea time pipe. But if I change into this,
This is the smut.
now, who am I? Interesting. Yes, it's interesting.
Isn't it?
The real Sherlock Holmes is still alive. His obituary has never been in the London Times, so I'm assuming he's still alive. But it's interesting. He never wore the hat like this, never wore the Inverness, never smoked a curved pipe, and never used a lens this big. It was basically William Gillette.
You did.
Me
Yes.
created the outfit for Sherlock Holmes. You know, Superman took the red S off of his chest and said, "Who am I? I don't know, a nice pair of tights, but I don't know who you are." So there are instantly identifiable items, traits, costumes that people associate.
The hat, the deerstalker.
Yes, Sidney Paget, the original illustrator, and I have a photo of him wearing one, wore a hat like this, so he put it on Sherlock Holmes' head. Now the Inverness, it never mentions Inverness in the stories, the 60 stories. It says he wore McFarlane, which is a tweedy type of top coat. And the lens, Sherlock Holmes never used a lens this big. Sherlock Holmes used a pocket lens. This is all I need to see a clue. But if you're in the back row of the theater, what's he got in his hand? I don't bloody know what he's got. So this is much more identifiable. And did I mention the curve?
Not you, yes.
Save that for the last.
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes primarily wore a straight briar. That's in many of the pictures. It was William Gillette who liked the curved pipe. The reason being, with the low center of gravity, it didn't bobble about as much in his mouth.
Right, but my darling, why'd you tell him the real reason? See, my husband bends the truth
Or
very
you're
often.
talking about that
yes,
rumor.
Yes, go.
Well,
Tell
if
him
you
the real
think
reason.
about it, I'm on the stage up here. The audience is down there. And I'm in my 20s and so on.
Very
Not
handsome,
married
George.
yet. Yes, yes. Now the audience is looking up at me. If I had a straight pipe sticking out like this, you couldn't see my face. With the curved pipe, I was much more visible.
Your lovely profile.
Thank you, dear.
Yes.
Now my father was Francis Gillette. My mother was related to Thomas Hooker, the founder of Hartford.
Can I tell him about
Yes.
you? My husband likes to be a little bit quiet about his family, not to brag, whatever. So I can tell you a bit about his father and his mother. But his father, Francis Gillette, was quite an interesting man. In fact, he was actually started the Republican Party in Hartford, and
It was
It's
called
called the
Free Soil
the Free
Society.
Soil Society. Wonderful. And I just lost my voice. Excuse me.
That's a first.
I just swallowed wrong. I'm sorry, excuse me. But he was also quite an abolitionist. And he was with the
Underground railroad.
sorry, please.
Well, he helped
I
the
really-
slaves.
Yes.
He helped run an underground railroad, actually in his house in Bloomfield.
Yes, he did. Yes. And quite an interesting fellow. And his mother, Helen Gillette, Helen Gillette I'm talking about. His mother, Elizabeth Hooker, she was related to Thomas Hooker, who started
Founder of Hartford.
Hartford, Connecticut. Yes.
Now, I purchased property in Hartford, and over the years, I had some rather illustrious neighbors, Harriet Beecher Stowe and Sam Clemens. Mark Twain was one of my neighbors. And what's interesting is that in the evening, we didn't sit at home looking at this big glass tube with a clickety-click in our hand. We would visit each other. So Sam Clemens might have us over because he's reading a chapter from the new book he was writing. So it's interesting. Now, I graduated from Hartford High School. I basically went on the road right out of high school. I never formally attended a college, but if I was in Boston, Harvard, Yale, someplace like that, I might take a class in set design or something along those lines. Over the years now, I became known as the aristocrat of the stage. Now, I entered an elocution contest when I was in high school, and I won. And I entered it the second time, and I went to my father, the grand old man, for advice. And he said, well, don't just get up there and talk. Look at people in the audience. Focus on them. Act normal. Don't just get up there and pontificate. And I did. Of course, I lost the contest, but I remembered something. So that later on, when I was in this position to write my own plays, so on, I remembered that I wanted the audience to think I was speaking my lines for the first time. It might be the 1,000th time, but I wanted them to think I would even hesitate and so on a little bit, as if I was trying to think about what to say. Now, I'm jumping ahead a bit here. Should I talk about the cinema at this point?
Yes, I think we should go with it.
Now, I only made one movie in 1917, sixth-reeler for SMA Productions, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes and so on. And in that movie, if you look at it, and they do sell it at the castle, so go buy some. But in the other stars in that movie, it's a silent film, they are silent movie actors. So they might go over to something and say, oh. But I didn't. I wanted to act normal. So I would go over to the table and go, very subtle. Now eventually that caught on, underacting. So today, if you go to the cinema, that's what you see. And I like to call it the illusion of the first time in acting. So my greatest gift to acting was not acting. Now, I've been talking about myself. Would you like to say
Yes,
something?
I think I've gotten my voice back.
Yes,
Yes,
that's a
I
shame,
helped
but
you.
that's okay.
Yes, that's all right. Once in a while it happens. You never lose your voice.
No.
No, you're correct. But yes, myself, Helen Gillette, a little bit about me. The way we met, I was an actress, nothing.
Oh, the very adequate one.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. But my husband never liked anything that was of the ordinary. And I was not of the ordinary at my time. I spoke my piece.
No, still do.
I do, I
Still do.
did, I loved it. But what he knew is that he liked his privacy. And he could say anything to me whatsoever.
Yes.
And that's where it went. You were that way all of your life. You liked privacy. But it was between the two of us, and we were just kindred spirits. And we had the best years of our life. You were going actually with another young lady. Yes.
Yes, she was after me for my
Yes, she was. She was. She wanted to get herself into the theater. But I gave up theater when we were together, and I just traveled the whole country with you. We enjoyed ourselves. We loved going to San Francisco, Cape Cod,
Oh,
some
the
of-
melons,
the
remember the
melons.
melons,
Oh, I
the
loved
tomatoes?
all that. Yes, it was wonderful. And one of my good friends was your friend, Mark Twain's wife.
Yes.
We wrote together, we wrote letters almost weekly to each other. We stayed friends all of my life, which wasn't a long one, unfortunately, because we were only married for 6 years. And I died at 28 years old. And we were in New York, and I wasn't feeling all that well. And I didn't say anything to my husband. I should have, but I didn't. I just kept quiet. And he finally knew that something was not quite right. Wanted to get me back to Hartford because you were the doctors
Yes.
out in Hartford Hospital.
My family from Hartford.
Yes. And we got as far as Costco. And it was too late. I had a ruptured appendix. I died at 28 years old. He was devastated. And he went into seclusion. I mean, he didn't want any part of the acting profession. Nothing. He said his life was over. And he went to Trondheim, North Carolina. Yes, you did. Had your house, 1,000 pines out there that you built. And it was an interesting little house. It's still there today. It's privately owned. But what you will see in your house now, the castle, the beautiful fireplace, everything was kind of done in a small scale. And you just kind of brought it into a large, yes. It's a wonderful, wonderful house. But he did not do anything. He just stayed away from the stage. Finally, when he started getting back into feeling better, he started working with the local people and started writing again. And you had a wonderful lady that took care of you there. And she was affectionately known as Empire. And that's who you wrote, you made in your book, was named after. Not people, a lot of people think that it was with Mark Twain and even Tom Sawyer. No, it had to do with this lovely little Empire out there. It was wonderful. But when he started writing, he took a lot of the female lead characters and gave her a lot of my characteristics. And I like to believe that Alice Faulkner, in your play, Sherlock Holmes, has a lot of me.
He does.
I think that's a lovely part of our love story. But I've talked enough.
No, that's
See,
all
I
right.
get my voice back and I just can't stop.
terrifying,
There we go. Go for it, my darling.
Now, I helped many actors get their start. Helen Hayes, Billy Burke, and there's a young gentleman, when he was young when I first found him, Charles Spencer Chaplin. You know him better as Charlie Chaplin. Now, what happened is I was touring in England, and I learned that you can make more money if you have two productions going on instead of just one. So I was performing in London, but on the outskirts there was a touring company of my plays, and the director noticed this young man, who seemed rather talented. He said, "Well, would you like to come to London and meet Mr. Gillette? William Gillette?" Yes. So I gave him his start, and that's Charlie Chaplin, as you know him today.
You taught him that you write the play, star in the play, produce the play, all of it.
Direct the play.
And they stayed friends all of their life. Now, Charlie was another person that did like privacy too. And it's interesting because when my husband died, it was a private funeral. But there was somebody there who gave the flowers and was there for him, and it was Charlie Chaplin. So he was a wonderful man.
Now, I helped many actors like Helen Hayes get her start.
Yes, you
And
loved
she
her.
came to me once.
Oh, there
And
was
she was, like you, a little short.
Yes, she was a
I was
little-
6'4".
Yes, and in fact, how she got started, Helen was only 16 years old when she wanted to get a part with you. Now, everybody wanted a part in a play with William Gillette. He was the foremost actor. He was
Yes,
of your-
still is.
Yes, you still are. But he turned her down, and she devastated at that time. But he says, "I'm sorry, my dear, but unfortunately for this play, you're just too short. But perhaps that in another time we might get a chance to work with each other." 2 years later, she was 18 years old. And there was every young ingenue wanted this part in the play Dear Brutus, to be with my husband, Will, and it was to be his imaginary daughter. Will remembered Helen, and he wanted her to have a part. So she came in, and he knew that she wasn't doing quite as well as she could. There was a little bit of a twang in her voice, but the acting was not quite as good as he knew that she could do. But she was doing everything the director had said. So finally, Will took her after hours to his dressing room.
Always chaperone.
Always chaperone. Mother was always there. Never an hint of scandal. And worked with her. And she paid attention to it. But he says, "Remember now, when we go on the stage and you're doing your rehearsals, you always do it the way the director says. But the day of our first performance, you do it my way." And that's what she did. The director was beside himself. Things weren't quite the same that he expected, but that's what she did. At the end of the play, when they had their curtain call, which was for the whole cast, and they took their bows, then the next curtain call comes, which would have been for Will, right? But Helen said, he had a hold of my hand, wouldn't let it go, and I'm thinking, my God, the man's as nervous as I am. but he held on to it, and they took another curtain call. I believe there were something like 18 curtain calls. And she says, I'll never forget what what Will said to her at that time. He says, my dear, you don't think that those laws were for me, they were for you. He says, what a marvelous thing for a man of his stature to say. When I was just such a young, everybody loved you, all of the young actors. I mean, there were
Now,
stories
as I
upon
said,
stories.
the reason I'm not well known today is because I only made one movie and it was thought to be lost forever until recently when you discovered it.
But one time, Helen did come to you. She
Yes.
was rather distraught because they had a wonderful relationship. But you was quite upset. Mr. Gillette, there's this terrible rumor going around that you and I are having an affair. And his wonderful response was,
Do you really find that to be so distasteful, my dear?
it was a wonderful response. It made her so comfortable. Mother approved of that
Yes.
too, yes. Yes,
Now,
so
my
on.
movie, that seven-reeler, was thought to be lost forever. And somebody was doing research in France on another project, and the curator of the museum said, well, we also have this cinema named Monsieur Gillette. Gillette. You mean Gillette? Oh, oui, Gillette. They discovered it, and they brought it to San Francisco where it was restored. And on a personal note, I got a phone call from a person who was doing research on the movie, was ecstatic, of course, that they found it. And her opening words on the phone were, they found it. And I knew what she meant by it. And at the wonderful castle, we had the premiere, and it was attended by many dignitaries, and it was a wonderful, wonderful event. So, getting back to Mr. Gillette. Now, I found out that if you wrote the play, you produced the play, you directed the play, you starred in the play, well, the money came your way. In the year 1900, I was making over $500 a week in royalties alone. In 1901, I made over $310,000. Income tax didn't start until 1914. You could keep it.
And a college graduate at that time was making maybe $750 a year.
Now, I had two houseboats.
Yes.
One of them being the Aunt Polly, which I named after the Aunt
Yes.
Polly. And I was on the Connecticut River, and I decided to pull into the ferry landing. Now, this is the second oldest ferry in America. The one in Rocky Hill, the Glastonbury is the oldest. And I walked up the path, and all this was forest and woods and trees and stones. And when I saw the view from here, I decided this is where I was going to build my retirement home, and I did. Now, the Aunt Polly, mentioned the Aunt Polly. It wasn't built for speed, it was built for comfort. I wrote to a friend saying, with a fair tide and a good wind, she would make a whole 2 knots. You would walk faster than that, but she was built for comfort. Now, after I returned to work, I toured Europe, and I loved the Gothic castles I saw in Normandy and so on. I went on the river and I could see these wonderful castles, and perhaps that's what gave me the subliminal idea for what I wanted to build someday. Started work in 1914, took 5 years. I never called it a castle. I used terms like my rough place in Connecticut or my pile of rocks. The state of Connecticut, when they acquired it, they call it the castle, Gillette Castle. Now think about this. By the way, it cost $1,100,000, I think, back then. That would be how much? 14 million today, probably.
Even more than that.
Now, I was accused of being cheap because I paid the local farmers $1 for a wheelbarrow full of fieldstone. 1914. Minimum wage was like, a college graduate made $750 a year. A loaf of bread was 3 cents. And Honus's restaurant, a little seafood restaurant downtown, you could get a lobster dinner for $4.
Yeah.
I wish we had that today. So as I said, people accuse me of being cheap, but not really.
Because the farmers love that. I mean, think about it, they were getting rid of the rocks from
They're trying to get
right.
through. Throw them away, and this guy's
If
going
you
to
got
pay
$1 or two wheelbarrows a day, got $2 in a day, that was wonderful. I mean, that was a
Now,
lot.
I know that you sometimes like to talk about,
Being cheap?
well, those are your words, ma'am.
Yes, well, that's a possibility. But, we could weigh the scales back and forth because generosity was there, but there was also a moment or two where you could be a little tight. Well, I'll give you the two sides of my husband here. First of all, we go with the plus.
Yes.
Actually, he was quite generous. When my husband died, there wasn't that much money left in the estate. We'd gone through the Depression and things like that, but also he was also giving money away. But it was always without no one's knowledge. It was quietly done. One of my favorite stories that this is true, and it was written up in the New York Times about him. He was doing his play in New York. There was an elderly lady in front of one of the theaters. She was known affectionately as Matches Mary. She was out there no matter what the weather was. Yes, she was out there. He observed her for a while. And what he did is one day he asked Mary and all of her family to come and see a performance of his play. It was a Christmas Eve performance. So the whole family comes up, and there he had a box for them, and they see the play. At the end of the play, they were invited backstage. He had Christmas dinner ready for all of them. And then before she left, he gave her $100. Now that was more money than Mary had ever seen in her life. But it also gave her a good life because she learned how to save her money, and she made a life for herself. And when she died, she had her obituary written in the New York Times. I think that's marvelous. Now, there's another story on the other side of this, how you could be tight. Okay. Now, this is from Charles Frohman, and he was known to always tell the truth. Why don't you tell them who Charles was first?
Charles Frohman was the biggest booking agent in the world, and he owned theaters actually. If you were in the theater in some way, you might have worked for Charles Frohman. Now,
he made $1 million a year.
Yes, he did. Back then, you could keep it too.
Yes.
Now he was going to Europe, and this was in I think 1915.
Yeah, I think it was. Yes.
And he wanted me to go with him, and I said I can't. I'm obligated. My performance in Philadelphia, the understudy is not up there. I can't go. Well, it's a good thing I didn't go with him, because Charles Frohman was on the Lusitania, and he was not one of the survivors. But there were survivors, and one of them was near him at the end, and she attended his funeral back in America. And she remembered he had made a quote from Peter Pan, "Death is one of life's greatest adventures." So Charles Frohman was quite a man.
Quite an interesting one. So he's the one that tells the story about you in London. So that when you were at the end of your performances, all of you gentlemen went to your apartment to play cards. And you have to play hearts, I think, was your favorite.
I usually won.
Because you would cheat, you would cheat all the time. But be that as it may, you had a good time in your apartment, but the ladies there were quite upset. They were hungry, so they went to one of the restaurants, and they were not allowed in.
No.
Because at that time, if you were a female, you were not allowed into many of the establishments unless you were accompanied by a gentleman. So they called up the boys, said, "We're hungry, we need something to eat." Gentlemen that they were, they got the basket of food, bring it over to the apartments for the ladies. So they rang the doorbell, but the doorbell was broken. So they start banging on the door, no answer. The ladies are up on the 3rd floor. So one of the fellows said, "We got to get their attention so they know we're here." And the fellow said, "Well, I've got some coins. Why don't we throw it at the window and get their attention that way?" So they're throwing and missing and throwing and missing. So finally the fellow said, "Well, I only have 1 coin left." And Charles Frohman says, "Why don't you give the last point to Mr. Gillette? Because he can make a penny go farther than anyone I've ever seen in my life."
I have one word for that.
An English word, I take
Good
it?
old-fashioned English word.
Piffle.
Piffle.
Piffle. Piffle. But
Piffle.
see, that's the truth. So there you are. Tightness.
Never owned a motor car, but I had
No.
motorcycles.
Yes, you
And
did.
I was once arrested for going over 50 miles an hour.
70 miles an hour.
And I had a newer car, a whole 225 miles.
Yes.
Big time. Now, one day I was coming down the path leading to the ferry landing, on the side of the castle, and the ferry was just pulling out.
Yes.
Now, ferries don't go like that. They just slowly
Yes.
pull out. And I was going pretty good rate of speed, so I figured, well, I can make it. I can get off the thing here and get right onto the deck. So I zoom, zoom, zoom. Here I come. Kerplunk into the river. I didn't make it. So I swam back to shore. Luckily, I wasn't wrapped up in a motorcycle. They did reclaim it, but the seat was always soggy.
Yes, you'll get right out of it. But you had a good time with your motorcycle.
Yes, I love it.
But you were in danger on the road. You were absolutely in danger on the road.
I rear-ended the truck once too.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And now, you know something you might have been noticing about this little young person here, one of your cats. My husband loved cats. And at the house, we had quite a few cats at a time. We didn't really keep count. There could be 15, 17 cats, quite a few cats at a time. But he enjoyed them, and they had a good life. In fact, you would even occasionally take a cat on stage with you, wouldn't
Yes.
you?
Yes. I remember in the play Sherlock Holmes once. At that point, I was having fun.
You
I didn't
you
worry
enjoyed
about
yourself.
you know,
Yes, you had a
critics
good
and so
time.
on. And there was a cat on the stage. It was the house cat.
Yep.
And somebody sneezed in the audience. And the cat jumped up in the air, leapt off the stage, leaped off the stage into the audience. They roared with laughter.
They had a great
I
time.
didn't care.
Yeah.
I had a good time. The cat had a good time. The audience.
Everybody
had a good
was
time.
happy. And then one of my little favorite stories I love. In fact, I'll give you two cat stories. I think. Will had a great sense of humor, and he also liked to write letters. He wrote many letters
Yes.
all the time. Yes. One of my favorite letters that he wrote, because sometimes there might be a cat or two here that were too many, and he would give them away, but they always went to the right person. You would never have a cat go to just anyone. You made sure it went to the right person. So one of the letters he wrote to one of the local papers said, up for adoption, 2 cats. Now, I don't want any of these cats to go to any stupid boobs who have absolutely no idea what a cat's wants and needs are. Therefore, I'm going to need some recommendations. Now, I prefer that the references come from your previous cats, but if that's too difficult, I suppose I'll have to take a human. And he signed it with his famous WG, right?
Yes.
And then how he got one of his little favorites was little Angelina. And that happened in Boston. He was always on the lookout for another cat. And he stopped at one of the local pet stores, and the proprietor was showing him some cats. And nothing at that time really appealed to you. The personalities were just
the right
right one.
personality.
Just as you were ready to leave, he sees this rickety old cat is coming up from the basement staircase. And he said, that's the cat I'm purchasing. Now the proprietor said, they can't have her. That's our house cat. She's our mouser. She's not for sale. Will said, needless to say, that's the cat I'm purchasing. Now you may keep her, but all of her offspring will belong to me. And they did. When she had kittens, they were sent here to the house. And Will took very good care of them. But when she got old in years and could no longer produce, she was sent here to the house. And she had one very happy little life. She would sit in the dining room table right next to you. She had her own little bib, her own most dishes to eat from. Yes, loved to crawl on your shoulders.
She might reach over for one of my oysters.
Yes, you loved your oysters. You could do 2 dozen oysters in sitting, yes.
Love it.
But he would take her around the Aunt Polly, and she spent the rest of her life one happy little cat. Yes, there you go.
Now, one of my favorite guests, because summer home in Old Lyme, was Albert Einstein. And he loved, can we show?
Yes, I think we can. Go ahead.
Is this video thing?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
One of my favorite guests was Albert Einstein, and he loved to ride the train.
Yes.
And I'd go full speed ahead, 20 miles an hour, and I wouldn't put on the brakes. Now, this is what Albert looked like after the train ride. This was his opinion of the train ride. So as I said, and here's Mr. Charles Spencer Chaplin. Yep, gave him the start. Now, we've been talking about William Gillette, but let's focus also on one of the main themes and how he made a lot of money. Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created the character, and he gave William Gillette brought him to life, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually created the character. And it's interesting because one of his teachers at Edinburgh University was Dr. Joseph Bell. Now, Dr. Bell had an interesting thing. He would ask his students to do what he did. And he had this beaker of liquid, and he dipped his finger, licked his finger, and he said, now, he passed it around. So all of you do what I just did. And they're dipping their finger, and they're licking the finger, and they're going, patooey, patooey, patooey. Oh, when it came back to him, he said, now, there's a reason I didn't make a face. This is horse urine. I dipped this finger, but I licked this finger. You see, but you did not observe it. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle based it, Sherlock Holmes, on that. Now, I wrote the play, and I was in San Francisco with William Postman, my stage manager. And I was at the Palace, and he was at the Baldwin, I think.
Yes, and it was a palace.
Oh, the Palace is, it still is today. It's a wonderful place. Now, he had the only handwritten copy. During the night, his hotel caught fire. He survived. Many, the hotel didn't do that well. So he came to my room like 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me up using words like hotel, fire. And I said, well, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine, but the script is gone. And I said, no problem. I have the original here. What you had was a copy. So, and Doyle finally had to meet William Gillette. Now, what happened is that William Gillette heard that the play was going to be produced, and he was creating a play about Sherlock Holmes. So Gillette went to his agent and said, now, maybe we can get something together here. And they contacted Doyle, and Doyle, good idea. And when Doyle was ecstatic because he was just in the process of building a house, a new manor. And he was running a little short on funds. So when he heard that William Gillette, the world's foremost actor, was going to become Sherlock Holmes, he was ecstatic. He wrote to his mother, he used to call her the man. Always wrote a lot of letters to his mother. Yes, he did. And he told her that William Gillette was going to play Sherlock Holmes. And she was ecstatic, he was ecstatic. We all made a lot of money.
Yes. In fact, when it started, when you were going to do the play, you wrote to him at first and said, may I marry Sherlock Holmes?
And he wrote back and said, you may marry him, you may murder him, you may do what you like with him. I don't really care.
But you stayed good friends, and you stayed in his house many times. In fact, during the war.
During the First World War, I couldn't go back and forth on the sea, the ocean. So he would have me over, actually, and stay in his house. Now, did you want to say anything about the...
Yes, in fact, Will performed basically almost to when he died. And one of his last performances happened to be in Hartford, Connecticut.
At the Bushnell?
At the Bushnell, yes. And the Hartford Courant, which is not known to give good reviews, really, very, very tight on that one. It said that go and see Mr. William Gillette. The Gables and the Garbos have to see him. He is an actor. And Orson Welles actually made a wonderful comment about Will. He said, it's not enough to say that William Gillette looks like Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes looks like William Gillette.
It's true. Now, a friend of mine was the world's largest collector of Sherlock Holmes memorabilia. And he was once asked in a newspaper interview, is Sherlock Holmes fact or fiction? And his answer was, yes. We thank you. And that was it. Are there any questions from the audience?
None that I can see yet, but give us, if you have anything else you want to say, go for it.
No, I think
would you like a little bit of something on Hal Holbrook?
Yeah, when Hal Holbrook was ready to do his Mark Twain, Sam Clemens,
that's an interesting story.
I read a clipping once that said that they were trying to find somebody to get the voice right. And they said, well, we have this recording.
Michigan Library, I believe, Michigan Voice Library.
In fact, you go.
Yeah, that of Mark Twain. And how that came about is, why don't you say about how you started actually in the theater? This kind of leads into that story. When you were just young, when you would go on the stage, when you were just getting into acting.
Yes. I was doing a one-man show.
Yes, and you would
And,
imitate actors.
Yeah, I was performing in Hartford.
Yeah.
Performing. I think it was the Strand Theater.
Yeah.
And I was doing imitations of politicians and actors and people in the military and so on.
Yeah.
And one of them I was imitating was Sam Clemens.
Yes.
And what I didn't realize is Sam Clemens was in the audience.
Yes.
And later on in the week we got together and talking, and he said that if I didn't know that I was sitting in the audience, I would sworn that was me
Yeah.
up there on the stage.
Yeah.
So I did a good job on imitating people.
So when they got for Hal Holbrook, when he was looking for Mark Twain's voice, and they checked it out at the library, the voice library, and I think Hal Holbrook said, it's interesting. But he says he does have a little bit of a New England tang to it in his voice. When they found out it wasn't Mark Twain's voice, it was actually William Gillette imitating him. And that was the closest that they could get to what Mark Twain's voice really was. So that was quite an interesting little story. And now we've got also the train that you had over here. When the house was sold, the train was sold to Laycomb House. And they got the train for, I think it was something like $2,000, wasn't it? Thereabouts. And it was there for years in the castle. I'd always wanted it back here. Eventually, a few years ago, when Laycomb House was sold to another
they
company,
wanted
whatever,
thrill rides and so on.
yes, so they got rid of the
Death-defying
train,
rides.
throw it out and whatever, put it in the trash. So we were able to get it here. And it was in terrible condition, but the wonderful friends of Sherlock Holmes and friends of Gillette Castle got the two engines, did the restoration.
And what's interesting is it was restored in the same building across the river where it was originally constructed.
Yeah.
And they still have the blueprints and
Yes.
everything, so it's as close to
Right.
the original as possible.
It cost about $10,000 to do the restoration of it. The other one is in storage, the other engine.
Yeah, if anybody wants to contribute
Yes.
10,000, they can restore
We will
that
take
one.
contributions
Yeah, we'll
right
take
away.
it. Cash is good.
Cash is good, yes, we take any.
So we thank you. Any questions out there?
No.
Any closing remarks?
Reviews, a lot of people have reached out. Some.
I'm sorry,